The golden hues of the setting sun bathed Denver International Airport in a warm glow as weary travelers bustled through the terminal, eager to board their flights and return home. Among them was a woman who stood out, not because she sought attention, but because she carried herself with an undeniable presence. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Carter stepped onto the plane, her combat boots making a muted yet firm sound against the floor. Her posture was upright, her expression calm, and her uniform was pressed with the precision of someone who took pride in it. But beneath that composed exterior lay the exhaustion of months spent in the unforgiving landscapes of war. She had seen things most people couldn't even begin to imagine, and tonight, all she wanted was to get home, hold her children, and remind herself that there was still warmth in the world. As she made her way down the aisle, she caught the occasional glance, some respectful, some indifferent, and one filled with contempt. Seated just behind her, a man in his late 40s shifted in his seat, his lips curling into a smirk. His eyes followed her with an unmistakable air of judgment. Evelyn, having spent years in uniform, had encountered men like him before, loud, entitled, dismissive. She had no interest in entertaining whatever he was about to say, but the man had no intention of keeping his opinions to himself. Figures, he scoffed loudly, making sure everyone around could hear him. They'll let just anyone wear the uniform these days. Evelyn inhaled deeply, her fingers tightening around the small photograph she had pulled from her pocket. It was a snapshot of her children, her son and daughter grinning at a 4th of July picnic, their faces lit up with joy. That image was her anchor. It reminded her why she endured everything she did. But the man wasn't finished. "I don't even know why they bother," he continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "What's she doing? Handing out Band-Aids. Bet she's never even seen real action." A hush fell over the surrounding passengers. Some exchanged awkward glances, clearly uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. The tension in the cabin thickened, but Evelyn remained still. She had faced far worse than words. The man leaned back in his seat, clearly enjoying the attention he was drawing. "Real soldiers don't need recognition just for showing up," he added, shaking his head. "It's all for show these days." Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. The young mother seated beside her, holding a sleeping toddler in her arms, glanced at her with sympathy. "Are you okay?" she whispered. Evelyn nodded, offering a faint smile. She didn't need to justify herself to a man who had never walked in her boots, never felt the weight of life and death decisions pressing down on his shoulders. Still, something about his words settled in her chest like a heavy stone. "Bet she's never even left a base," the man muttered again, loud enough for those nearby to hear. An older gentleman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably. He looked like he wanted to say something, but his wife gently placed a hand on his arm and shook her head. "Don't," she whispered. "It'll only make things worse." The flight attendant, a petite woman with a warm but weary smile, appeared near Evelyn's row. She hesitated for a brief moment before speaking, her voice laced with professionalism. "Is everything all right here?" "Oh, everything's fine," the man said with a smirk. "Just making an observation. Hope I'm not offending anyone's delicate feelings." The attendant's expression tightened, but she simply nodded and moved on, unwilling or perhaps unsure of how to diffuse the situation. Evelyn let out a slow, measured breath. This wasn't new. She had spent her entire career proving herself, not just on the battlefield, but in the very rooms where people like this man never expected her to belong. She had heard it all before, too soft, too weak, just a medic. Never mind that she had saved lives while under fire, pulled wounded soldiers from burning wreckage, and stood in places most men wouldn't dare. As the plane began to taxi, she closed her eyes and leaned back in her seat, allowing the memories to wash over her. She wasn't thinking about this man, his words, or the silent stares of the other passengers. She was back in the heat of the desert, where courage wasn't defined by words but by action. She remembered the day everything changed. The explosion that ripped through the convoy, the deafening roar of an IED, the chaos that followed. She could still hear the desperate cries of injured soldiers, still feel the blood staining her hands as she worked frantically to keep them alive. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. She had done what needed to be done because that was who she was. And she had done it not for recognition, not for medals, but for the people who put their lives on the line every day. Back on the plane, Evelyn opened her eyes and glanced at the man behind her. He was flipping through a magazine now, seemingly content with his earlier remarks. She didn't hate him. Hatred was a burden she refused to carry. But the universe has a way of revealing the truth, often in ways no one expects. And for Evelyn Carter, tomorrow would bring a moment of reckoning, one that neither she nor the man behind her could ever have anticipated. The morning sunlight streamed through the blinds of Marcus Taylor's living room as he absent-mindedly stirred his coffee. His morning routine was simple: check his phone, scroll through the news, and sip his drink while the television hummed in the background. But today, something made him look up. The anchor's voice carried a tone of solemn reverence. "This morning, we honor a true American hero," she announced. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Carter, a combat medic who risked her life to save not only her fellow soldiers but countless civilians during her deployment overseas. Marcus nearly dropped his coffee. The woman's face appeared on the screen, her military portrait staring back at him with quiet strength. His chest tightened, a sinking feeling spreading through his gut. It was her, the woman from the plane, the one he had humiliated. His ears rang as he listened to the anchor recount Evelyn Carter's extraordinary service. They spoke of the ambush on her convoy, the explosion that tore through their vehicles, and the chaos that followed. They described how, despite the overwhelming danger, she had rushed into the fire, pulling wounded soldiers from burning wreckage, shielding them with her own body, refusing to leave them behind even as enemy gunfire rained down around her. Marcus swallowed hard. She sustained serious injuries, the anchor continued, but continued to provide life-saving medical aid, refusing treatment for herself until every last soldier was safe. His hands trembled as he set his coffee down. The screen shifted to an interview with a former soldier, a young man, no older than 20, his voice shaking as he spoke. "I was bleeding out," he said. "I thought I was going to die. But she wouldn't let me. She dragged me to safety while bullets were flying. She saved my life." Another clip showed an elderly woman in a remote village, speaking through a translator. "She saved my granddaughter," the woman said, her eyes filled with gratitude. "If not for her, we would have lost everything." Marcus felt like he had been punched in the gut. The night before, he had sat comfortably on that flight, spitting insults at a woman he knew nothing about. He had mocked her, belittled her, and dismissed her service as if it were meaningless. And all the while, she had sat there in silence, letting his words roll off her like they were nothing. Because they were nothing. She didn't need to prove herself to him. She had already proven herself on the battlefield. Marcus leaned forward, gripping the edge of his chair as the broadcast continued. The anchor listed Evelyn's commendations, her Bronze Star for bravery, her multiple deployments, her years of dedicated service. "This is the kind of heroism that often goes unnoticed," the anchor concluded. "Today, we shine a light on the extraordinary sacrifices made by those who serve, especially those like Staff Sergeant Carter, who embody the true spirit of compassion and courage." Marcus couldn't breathe. The woman he had sneered at, the one he had degraded in front of an entire cabin of passengers, was a hero. His words from the flight echoed in his head. Figures. They'll let just anyone wear the uniform these days. He felt sick. For years, Marcus had believed he understood the world. He had built his opinions like walls, solid and immovable, convinced that his view was the only one that mattered. But now, that foundation was crumbling beneath him, leaving him with nothing but the weight of his own ignorance. And guilt. So much guilt. He spent the rest of the morning in a daze, replaying the flight over and over in his mind. The way she had sat there, calm and unmoved, while he tore her down with his words. The way she had endured it without a single word of defense, because she didn't need to. Marcus had always seen himself as a man who respected the military. But what did his so-called respect really mean if it only applied to the people he thought deserved it? If he had truly respected the military, he would have respected all who served, not just the ones who looked like what he expected a soldier to be. He couldn't undo what he had done. His words had already been spoken, his actions witnessed by an entire plane full of people. But the shame gnawed at him, and he knew he had to do something. He pulled out his phone and searched Evelyn Carter's name. Articles flooded his screen. Stories of her bravery, interviews with those she had saved, reports of her unwavering dedication. The more he read, the worse he felt. An apology felt too small, too meaningless in the face of what he had done. But he had to try. He sat down and wrote a letter. Dear Staff Sergeant Carter, you don't know me, but I know you now. I was the man on the plane, the one who disrespected you, who judged you without knowing a single thing about you. I saw you on the news today. I saw the truth of who you are, and I can't put into words how ashamed I am of my actions. I belittled you when I should have honored you. I insulted you when I should have thanked you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know this. I was wrong. So deeply, unforgivably wrong. You didn't deserve my hate. You deserved my respect, and I failed to give it to you. I will carry the weight of that failure for the rest of my life. But I promise you this, I will do better. I will open my eyes, open my mind, and never again judge someone based on my own ignorance. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your courage. And thank you for being a better person than I was. With deepest regret, Marcus Taylor, he stared at the letter, unsure if she would ever see it. But writing it wasn't about easing his own guilt. It was about accountability. It was about acknowledging the harm he had done and vowing never to let his prejudices go unchecked again. Later that day, he made a donation to a veteran support organization. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was a start. Marcus knew he couldn't rewrite the past, but he could make sure the lesson stayed with him for the rest of his life. Because sometimes, the people we judge the harshest are the ones who have given the most. And sometimes, the greatest acts of courage aren't just found on the battlefield. They're found in the quiet dignity of those who endure, even when the world refuses to see them.